The lack of motivation, false motivation is good enough. Okay, so we've already put this out. We're going to participate collaboratively here. If you have your phone and we don't blow up the internet, you can go to that site, click on the Get Started, type in Sarah Jacobs 546, and then it's going to be kind of a Q&A session. We're going to use that to kind of help facilitate the discussion tonight a little bit. So it's something new. We're going to try it. So please play along. Is anybody in here in the Best Warrior competition? Because that's next door.
How do we come?
All right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and kick off tonight. Today's LDP is a continuation of our Dignity and Respect series. This is the last topic in this series before we switch to general leadership topics and do some different things. So please turn the volume down on your phone in case it dings or rings too. This topic is very sensitive. It's a very sensitive one and aligns with our Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. And I know we've had a lot of small group kind of discussions on that. Today we will talk about how to support and care for survivors, or who are often labeled as victims. Why pick this topic? Because taking care of someone who is on our team, our tribe, our squad, and that has been through a horrific event should be a number one priority for us. Survivors didn't ask to be assaulted. It's not their fault, and they need all the support we can give them. Sexual assault is a complicated topic, as the process is emotional, degrades morale, can take too much time to resolve, can be overwhelming to the survivor and close family. Regardless, the expectation is that we as leaders do everything in our power to take care of the survivors. What we want to do is have a candid conversation today around what a survivor may be feeling, when it's appropriate for us to support, and what are appropriate ways to support. The individual is a survivor as soon as the assault has happened, but we may not be aware until it is reported. And then it's a matter of who knows based on the status of restricted versus unrestricted. Our actions from the beginning to the end of the process, which can take time as it proceeds from investigation through legal action to results, are critical to the care of the survivors. What we are not going to talk about is false accusations or other topics that are not related to directly supporting the survivor. Fortunately, we have a panel of experts, and we'll introduce them here in a second, to talk about the process, share experiences, and help us together grow and gather ideas. Disclaimer, if you are a survivor and wish to talk about something that's maybe happened to you, we do have the resources here that can provide you confidential and professional support. No struggle is too big to bear when you have support, and that's why we're here. Okay? Did I miss anything?
Not yet. We'll just skip the video.
Okay, so what we're going to do is shift and show a video.
Can we shut that off so it's not humming?
Okay.
I was sexually abused when I was about 8 by an older male cousin.
I've been sexually assaulted on 4 different occasions.
I was 6 years old, the first time that I was molested. A neighbor named Hank took me into his house. And at first it was hugging, and then his hands traveled. And when I tried to push him away, he beat me. And then he raped me.
And I was haunted by the fact that this happened in a little girl's bedroom.
For a long time, I blamed myself. I was just angry because I'd go to school and nobody in school knew what was going on.
When I tried to tell my mom, she kicked me out of the house and laughed at me and told me I would never deserve anything better. It became something that lasted until I was 17 years old.
I remember after it happened and after he left, sitting on a bed for a while, torn up and saying, I am never going to tell another living person about this. I went and got my friends, and I drove them home.
Thank you for reading that.
Thanks.
Now, if you had the chance, how would you respond to this person's story?
I just feel like we're just like hug her. And just let her know it's not her fault. You were a little girl. It's not your fault.
You actually have the chance to meet that person because they're here tonight. This is James Metters. This is Mark Godoy Jr. This is Isaac Andrade. This is Walter Castaneda. This is Glenn Hall. He served in the Army for 30 years, retiring as Command Sergeant Major. And what you just read is his story. What you just read is his story.
Oh my God.
How do you do? Doing good. Thank you very much, sir.
I know this is history because 1 in 6, I go into a room and I count 6 men. Like there's somebody else in here. They're probably dealing with the same way I dealt with it, which is not talking about it.
To share the same experience, I was young and I was in college. I was sexually abused. We don't talk about these things, but it happens,
I grew up in a Latino household. My dad's like, telling me, no llores, cabrón. No eres vieja, So girl, cry. And on the other side, you're getting abused and you don't know what to say.
I joined the Army to die. I was a Jewish from the time I was born till I was 17.
Massively being put away what I was feeling and not really deeply feel what happened to me, recognize and acknowledge what happened to me.
Getting suspended in the 4th grade, getting in a fight, getting expelled from one high school. It's all part of the abuse. And it's all part of me, a child, when you're a child, acting out and starving for attention.
One of the reasons I was in the rank of the military, they like tough guys. But inside I was dying.
Still makes me emotional. That what happened to me wasn't because of who I am. It was something that was done to me. It's not me.
I know a lot of males are too afraid to speak up, but I'm real open because I want to inspire the male survivors. That not just males with disabilities, but also males without disabilities.
I identify myself as a Black gay survivor. I had a lot of fear, and I just posted a link on Facebook saying, this is my story, if you want to read it, you can read it. And the response I got after that was nothing but kind. Every time I share my story, especially as a man, I always hear back, hey, can I talk to you? Yeah, what's up? This happened to me too. This happened to me too. This happened to me too.
I'm not doing it just for myself, it's for many others whose voices not been heard before.
it's really hard not to cry. I'm really glad you've done the work, and I know that you changed somebody's life, so that's all I can think about.
You can survive it, you can get through it.
I think you're just so strong. Like, I don't know if you know, but you're very strong.
Thank you.
It just makes you remember and realize that everybody has a story.
Turn the lights on, Sarah. All right, powerful message. Kind of a sobering way to start this, but. All right, we're going to go ahead and start with the next part of the discussion. If you guys are talking, you do have to use this thing.
Are we passing both? We have to pass
Yeah.
both.
So when preparing for this tonight, we talked about doing a panel, and I had talked to all these individuals on the stage. We interact for different reasons, not just around Sharp. But one of the things that I said to them is, we wanted to do something Sharp related for LGBT. and we wanted to talk about how to best support survivors. So I asked each of them to be on this panel because of the area that they cover and how it relates to survivors. So I've asked each of them to introduce themselves, give a little background. I know you might say, oh, I'm a lawyer here and I'm a lawyer at home. But what specifically you've done, I think is interesting and adds value. Then I've also asked each of them to talk just briefly about how their role is during the process of working with survivors, and also something they've seen that has worked really well to support survivors, or something that was done incorrectly that had a negative effect on the process. So that's what you can expect from us. And I'll go ahead and start with you. So we need to pass both? Bear with us because we're recording, so you have to pass both when you're talking.
So, as chaplain, of course, for survivors, I would offer confidential counseling, and that is strictly confidential. I have no obligations for mandatory reporting or anything like that. So it is strictly confidential counseling. Would also offer a non-judgmental and empathetic presence and listening ear. And where a person was, and of course makes me no difference whether a person is religious or not, or considers themselves spiritual or not. But if they were religious or spiritual, I certainly would want to provide religious spiritual support as well. One thing that I would mention from my lane that I would strongly encourage of survivors, and I probably wouldn't push it immediately. I would take a little time first to listen, to understand, to empathize with the survivor. But one thing I eventually would want to encourage a survivor to and towards would be forgiveness. And that's really significant in regards to my faith tradition. A twofold forgiveness, really. First, a forgiveness of self. Now, a survivor has done nothing wrong. They are a victim. But it's understandable that a survivor in many cases would have a sense of guilt, a sense of shame, and perhaps even a sense of responsibility for what has happened, even though they're not at fault. It's really important for a survivor to forgive themselves, to understand that they did nothing wrong, but that they were wronged by someone else. But then I would encourage a survivor to also forgive the perpetrator. And that may rub you the wrong way, but I would encourage that not for the perpetrator, but for the survivor, because to harbor unforgiveness is fertile soil for bitterness, for anger, for resentment, for all kinds of really unhealthy emotions. Now, to forgive does not mean to condone what's been a wrong that's been done. It does not mean to forget, but it means to, in a sense, to let go of a need or a desire for revenge or retribution or for bitterness or hatred, because those things are only harmful to yourself. And so that may rub some people the wrong way. Again, I don't say this to say I condone sexual harassment or assault. I would never condone that. But forgiveness from my lane is a really important and significant theme for a survivor.
All right, so before we start the next speaker, I want you to go to the poll. I've activated one of the questions. If you've come in late, polleverywhere.com is what we're using. And hopefully you can get information from someone next to you. Sarah Jacob, Sarah with H, 546 is the presentation name. So again, you should see a question and we'll give you just a few seconds to respond to that. So after every speaker, I'm going to post a new question. All right? Go ahead, thank you.
My name's Captain Kimberly Raymond. I am the SANFI, or the Sexual Assault Medical Forensics Examiner, here for all of K4 and the Balkans. Basically, my position in this would be if we call them a patient, because anybody that comes through the doors of the clinic, we remove titles at the time because it can make people feel uncomfortable. So if I receive a patient, it's because they've consented to have a sexual assault nurse exam. It is voluntary. A lot of people have that misconception that if a patient experiences a sexual assault that they have to be examined. It is up to the person themselves on whether or not they want to be examined, because thinking about having to tell your story to 3 to 5 to 7 people can be re-traumatizing for our patients. So if we do have somebody within our footprint that experiences a sexual assault, comes to the clinic to be seen medically, also wants to be examined, I will be there for them for emotional support and to collect the forensics information. And then we would end up forwarding the information and the packet to our law enforcement personnel. Everything is kept completely confidential. So if the patient wants to do a restricted or unrestricted report, it's up to them. And filing an unrestricted report will have their information on the outside of the box, but the only people that will ever be able to track that information would be law enforcement. So everything's need to know, kept confidential. My office is out of the way for the patient to have a little bit more comfort. Another element would be, I'm also a nurse. I'm also a mom. I'm also a friend. I am a mandatory reporter. So if somebody were to come to me and say, hey, can I say this in confidence? Unfortunately, I cannot. I have to report the incident and make sure that the person gets taken care of. And that's not to betray confidence, that's actually to instill confidence in our system and to make sure we're protecting our soldiers.
So I have posted a new question, so if you go on the phone now and answer the second question. The thing I want to add to in talking to Captain Raymond is that the clinic knows who she is and what her role is as a Sandy. So if you bring someone, you come with someone to the clinic or you yourself go to the clinic, they will make sure that you skip that check-in process. You won't be handled the same way as if you were showing up for sick call. You'll be taken directly to her. You're not going to have to say anything to the individual that's there doing check-in. You will just say, I'm here to see the Sandy or I'm here to see Captain Raymond, and you'll be taken directly to her.
And just coming directly to me doesn't mean that the patient is going to get, that the patient's going to get the exam, because we can also treat them medically. So that's why they come straight to me. I find out what the patient needs, and then we take care of them in a holistic way, not just for the reason they're coming in.
All right, go ahead.
So my name is Sergeant Usir. I am one of the investigators here on Camp Bonsteel at the PMO. We are responsible for responding to any allegations of sexual assault. I think right now we're covering down all of the Balkan region. Back home, I am a corporal at the Fort Meade Police Department. It's my job to train new officers that are coming into the department. I've also been an investigator for about 3 years while I was on active duty, so I have experience with individuals coming and reporting sexual assault allegations to PMOs on Fort Meade and at Fort Polk as well. So sexual assault is under the purview of CID, but in this environment it is very likely that we would be responding to any allegations of sexual assault depending on the CID that is out of Germany, if they're able to come down, whether their caseload is too heavy or for whatever COVID-19 reasons. We also have the possibility of investigating any of those allegations. So some things that I've seen that best supports victim is honestly the chain of command and how supportive they are. Finding that balance between being too supportive and too distant. If they're too supportive, the victim or the individual may feel just too, I guess you could say, too crowded and might shut down, might not want to talk. If chain of command feels too distant and isn't supporting enough, they might feel alone and they might also shut down and not talk. So having that balance between the two and being able to build rapport with individuals prior to any incidents happening so that you can learn how to best support the individual soldier as an individual kind of person. Everyone reacts to traumatic experiences differently, and I think that that's also another good reason why the chain of command that is active with individual soldiers prior to any incidences happening ends up with kind of the better outcome. Soldiers feel more comfortable when it gets to our lane for investigating, talking about the incident, because they understand, they know that they're not alone. Some things that I've seen that kind of hinders the process, one of the first questions really for any victim of any crime is, will my chain of command find out? Will people gossip about me? So having kind of a control on the information flow of information that chain of command receives, and keeping that on a need-to-know basis, and not telling things outside of that kind of line, personal information, is going to really benefit the individual that's trying to make the report, trying to heal themselves, really better in the long run. An example, I responded to an incident where a friend had called about someone that she had known that was involved in a sexual assault incident about a couple days before the actual call had come in. And on arrival, the victim didn't know that police were called. So when we showed up, the whole game had kind of changed for her. She didn't really want to make a report. She hadn't gotten to that point in that process for her. So the minute that we showed up, she just shut down. She wanted to find someone to talk to about the incident. And so when law enforcement came and changed that route for her without her having to make that decision for herself, it was just a much more difficult process for her. And I think it's also really important to kind of reiterate what Captain Raymond had said earlier, that victims are traumatized, they feel violated multiple times. Once, of course, on the initial assault, the second, if and when they go to medical, and then the third, once they come to law enforcement, if they decide to make a report, they have to answer questions, very, very detailed personal questions that are very traumatic. It feels like they're reliving the situation all over again. And that's it for me.
All right, so I posted another question. If you could please go to the website. We'll give just about another minute for everyone to answer that.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Captain William Offutt, licensed clinical social worker, and as everyone here knows, I'm also a synchronized swimmer. Okay, that's all I'm looking for is a couple of laughs, even though we're talking about something, that's very serious. I think a better mindset to be in is a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more not so uptight about what we have to talk about here today. So when I typically, if we're talking about the same person here, by the time I'm talking to this person, unless they're being proactive, unless someone has brought them to me or encouraged them to come to me, I'm typically seeing them after a while, after the event has happened, and they start to experience what we call common reactions to trauma. Okay, so being sexually assaulted is a traumatic event. And the thing about the human body doesn't distinguish between traumas. So, being sexually assaulted, being blown up, being raped, robbed, in a rollover accident, there are common reactions that we experience when that happens to us. And typically where I start is, I'll hear the story and usually attempt to normalize what they're going through and let them understand that, these symptoms that you're describing, they're normal. And many people get better on their own. A few months, 2, 3 months, 4 months. Some take longer and some don't get better at all without some help. And I can provide that help. But for this group of people, a group of leaders, I think the most important thing that you can do if something's reported to you and you have someone under your care who has been assaulted and is going through the process in the system, is for you to understand that there may be some behavioral changes. Best thing for you to do is to listen, to be flexible, and to be supportive. So what I mean by that is if you're aware that person's been sexually assaulted and they come in and maybe their high and tight is not as high and not as tight, maybe you cut them some slack, or maybe you, within your ability, you do what you can to facilitate healing, okay? And then you let the experts, like the chaplain, the Sanfie, myself, you let us kind of take care of the rest. But to listen to their needs, to get them to the resources that they need, and to care about them in that manner, I think is probably the best thing for leadership. That's all I got.
All right, so I have posted a new question. If we'll take just 2 minutes for you to go ahead and answer that.
It is the legal question. So after you're done talking, I'll tell you what people said. I just did yes or no.
Sounds good.
So we'll wait this for now. Okay, I think we're good.
All right, my name is Captain David Brooks. I am a JAG officer, which means I'm an attorney here. My job overall is to advise leaders, commanders on a variety of different issues. I also advise soldiers when they come to me with personal issues like taxes or divorces. But one of the big things that I advise leaders on are when sexual assaults happen, because if there is a sexual assault that's known to the command, there are very real, quick, strict legal processes that have to happen. And then there are some that are discretionary. For example, the victim or the survivor is going to have some say in what happens. During my time as a JAG, I was able to spend 6 months as the staff judge advocate of the Iowa National Guard, and advised the command of the Iowa National Guard on, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it was quite a few sexual assault cases, some that happened while I was serving, but also just a lot of historical cases that had happened oftentimes before the soldier had even joined the military. On the civilian side, when I'm not on active duty, I actually have a bit different of a role. I'm a defense attorney, and so I interact with survivors on a different level of the criminal justice system. As far as my thoughts on, for the leaders here, on how they can best assist survivors when it comes to the legal process, I think there's two things. The first thing is communication is just very, very important. Honestly, the vast majority of military sexual assault cases that I've been involved in, what I have seen is a survivor just does not feel like the command is communicating what is happening, and it leads to a lot of frustrations. I think that as an attorney, oftentimes I can assume that everyone else knows what is going on in a case, when in fact that's just not true. And so I think as leaders, that's also something where you might be privy to information, and that just does not get shared with survivors, which causes a lot of mistrust in the system, a lot of people to believe that no one cares. And so I think communication is very, very important. The second thing I would highly recommend is just don't overpromise what is going to happen. Ultimately, when a sexual assault happens,
there's the, you know, kind of what Captain Offutt can provide, for example, that support that a legal side go. There's a lot of complicated things that can happen, and I think it's just very important to not overpromise. Once you promise someone something, they come to depend on it, I have found, and you know, sometimes things don't happen like you would hope they would in the justice system for a variety of reasons, and so I would just recommend not overpromising.
Okay, so I did post an opportunity for you to ask a question. So some of you are already doing that, and so please go ahead and take a minute if you have a question. Keep in mind that even if you entered your name when you set it up, it's not going to show names to me. I have that turned off, so it won't show any names. Oh, I'll tell you to. So I'll read it to everyone, but 72% said no about your question. It was no. All right. Oops, sorry. I'll go ahead and talk. If you have a question you want to put in as I'm talking, feel free to do that. So my name is Major Sarah Jacobs, and I think most of you know that I'm the SARC here for RC East. At home, I am a licensed clinical social worker. I do hospital social work. A few things, I just really appreciate all the panel being here. They all have a lot to offer. I think definitely one thing I want to impress upon everyone, that you don't have to be the expert. So when I talk to people, I say, you know, you guys use manuals and other experts in different fields that might know things that you need help with. So I hope you'll use this panel as that. It's not very often that you have 3 lawyers that you can talk to and not have to pay personally. So take advantage of them. Not trying to drum up business for you, but I think I also want everyone to be aware of like how closely this group works together. I mean, it's definitely multiple times a week that I'm on the phone talking to one of the lawyers for sure. Captain Off and I talk about different things. Just really everyone on this panel I just interact with weekly, and so it's really a comprehensive approach to helping survivors. I want you guys to remember that we have to remember the autonomy of survivors and their choices. Where I can see people maybe getting frustrated is, you know, a lot of leaders tend to be type A personalities that want to solve problems and execute the mission, and this is not that kind of thing. So when you're in a position to do things and to help, that's what you need to do, but we also just need to be aware that sometimes people will experience sexual assault and choose not to make a report. And that can be for many reasons, some of which we may never know why. They can choose to come talk to us and choose not to make a report, or they can choose to do restricted, right? Which means I'm not able to tell anyone about it. So just keep in mind that there are reasons that people might choose to do a different report type. I also want to say too, I think it's been said a little bit, but you're laying the groundwork right now for how likely someone is to come to you or to ask for help when they need help. So the command climate that commanders are setting, the climate that you are setting as section leaders is laying the groundwork for how likely people are to come to you when they need help. When someone has experienced a sexual assault, it's too late. It's not the time. If you haven't laid that groundwork or they don't trust the leadership, they will not get help sometimes, so just keep that in mind. What I hear from survivors is that they wish it didn't happen. They want it just to all go away. They want everything to just go back to whatever normal is for them. And I say, well, if I had the magic wand and I could wave it and I could make it all go away, I would do that, but we can't do that. So here we are now, and what do we do with what we have now? We've covered this. Most of you in here have been in small groups. I know a few of you haven't, but most of you have been. And so another thing to remember, the 600-20 Army Command Policy updated in June of 2020. Prior to that, dating back definitely to at least 2014, there was a sentence that said that any soldier that became aware of a sexual assault must report it, and it does not say that anymore. So if you are in the chain of command and someone comes to you
and you are their supervisor. Don't get confused, it's whatever role you have here, right? Squad leader, section leader, you know, the CAV has acting team leaders, so there might be E4s or acting team leaders. They are considered to be in the chain of command and would be mandatory reporters. So we are going to talk about the pulling out questions and answers, but who are the people that you can either talk to or help bring victims to that would maintain their reporting rights, that it would not trigger an automatic investigation? Who are those people? And you can just yell it out. The chaplain, we'll come back to the chaplain. The victim advocates, who else? You just call it out. So healthcare providers. So this is interesting because I want to come back to the SAMFI in a minute. So she said that she's a mandatory reporter, so I'll let her talk that piece. When we talk healthcare providers, we definitely mean like the PAs, the doctors. We don't mean the 68 whiskeys. I don't think many people are confused about that, but I always do like to mention that. Okay, so VAs, healthcare providers, specifically meaning the docs, right? The chaplain we'll come back to. Who's the other person or position? The SARC is the other position. So the chaplain cannot take a report of sexual assault. People often think of the chaplain, and I'll use the pronoun he because ours is a male, because you have complete confidentiality with him. So he's often the first one that people mention, which is great that they know there's someone they can talk to. So I don't want to speak for him, but he would encourage that individual to talk to one of us, but he would not be able to facilitate that unless he had permission to do so. He offers complete confidentiality. The difference with the SARC or the victim advocates is there are exceptions to our confidentiality. Does anybody know what the two exceptions are to our confidentiality? To who? Yeah. To be fair, you've been in the small group too, but maybe most of you don't. So threat to self or threat to others. So if someone was suicidal or homicidal, we would consider both of those to be times we'd have to break that confidentiality. Now, the other exception would be if I am aware that the same subject or perpetrator, whichever word you want to use, has been listed at least twice, I would have to find a way to address that. I wouldn't have to break the confidentiality of the victim, but if I'm aware, I would definitely have to address that if we had someone that is showing up in more than one case. All right, so I'm gonna go to a few of the questions. It was mentioned early on, I just wanna say that false allegations are so low that the Academy teaches that they are not statistically significant. I would also submit to you that if you are someone that has been named in one of those false allegations, you probably would have a differing opinion on that. And I have met and talked to individuals that have been named, and that is difficult because, as most of you probably are aware, there are immediate actions that happen against the subject when they are named in a sexual assault. They are immediately, their security clearance is suspended, and they are immediately flagged until the investigation is complete and the findings come out. So we need to support survivors, and then also just be aware it's super important that you don't talk about things that have happened, because it does impact more than just the victim and the survivor. It impacts other soldiers as well. All right, so one of the questions was specifically involving the JAGS role. So I'm gonna hand that back to you real quick. Yeah. Let's address that right now. So we're gonna pass that down. Right, we're gonna pass that down so the SAMFI can address that real quick and then just bring it back to you.
So when it comes to, as far as mandatory reporting, not I will go and I will report to CID and have an unrestricted report for the patient. I have to report to a healthcare provider that this occurred with my patient. Not that we're gonna unrestrict this and then everybody's gonna have the knowledge on it. It's just basically if somebody comes to me as a nurse and says, this happens to me, I have to execute different steps in the medical line in order to make sure that this patient gets help. But I don't go directly to law enforcement because then obviously that would jeopardize the patient's desire to keep it restricted. I apologize if I made it confusing before. But yeah, if they come to me, I don't tell anybody else but the healthcare provider, but it is my responsibility to make sure that the patient gets the care that he or she deserves.
All right, we'll pass it back down to the judge. Just bear with us, this is the first time we've done the panel thing. So, the question was, if you inform a JAG officer that you have been sexually assaulted, can the information remain restricted? Give me just 1 second. So, 72% of you said no, and 28% said yes.
So the general answer is that if I find out about a sexual assault, it's no longer going to be restricted. I will inform the commander about it, and it will be an unrestricted report. However, it does, I think, get somewhat confusing. Having to report something that someone has told me to the commander just feels wrong as a lawyer, where I am used to always having confidentiality with my clients. And so I do think there are some nuances there. So for example, if I'm helping someone in Major Smith or Captain Faith, if you disagree with me, let me know. But if I'm helping someone with a divorce, for example, and they confide in me as part of that representation that they were sexually assaulted maybe by the person that they're getting divorced from, that is staying with me because we have that attorney-client relationship. But for the most part, if someone just comes to me and says, hey, I was sexually assaulted, that information is going to go to a commander. What I would advise always is, if something like that were to happen and you were to have a question, I mean, it's always good just to go to the SARC. You can also ask a general question of me, like in this situation, would it remain restricted or not? But for the most part, most of the information that I receive is not going to remain restricted.
Can you explain the SBC role in the Army?
Yes, so there are exceptions to that. So in my role as a JAG officer for the brigade here, for RC East, ultimately I work for Colonel Adams, and Captain Faith and Major Smith do as well. There are attorneys out there who are assigned to help with victims. So they're called it's called the Special Victims Council. And so when someone is the victim of a sexual assault, they can request that an attorney get assigned to them, just like the alleged perpetrator is going to have an attorney assigned to them. The victim has the right to have an attorney, and there will be strict confidentiality between the victim and that attorney who is assigned. And that attorney will also be able to meet with that victim and attend court hearings with that victim and explain that process from a legal perspective. So it's not a program that's existed for a very long time. I think it's roughly about 5 years old. But I've had a chance to work with some of those attorneys, and it's a good chance for victims to have those legal questions answered in a way that's strictly confidential. And for the National Guard, that Special Victims Council, I think always, if not always, almost always, is actually an attorney from a different state, so that there's not any, there's nothing to worry about with that attorney being pressured in their rating scheme or anything like that.
So the way that the Special Victims Council comes into play, well, because we're recording. All panel members, please speak into the microphone. It's like this.
So just for knowledge, the Special Victims Council with the SARC, or whenever the patient comes to me, that's part of the process. It's actually a list of all the different elements that we can offer to the patient, asking them if they want to contact this person, this person, this person, and it's actually on the forms to make sure that I do my job, and also the SARC does their job to make sure we offer everything that's available for the person.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the poll results real quick, and we'll go through some of the questions. So just bear with us, we're going to be passing this back and forth. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask that you did not put in the poll? We could take that right now too. Or if anybody has been involved in a sexual assault case, meaning like you've been the leader or you've been a battle buddy, and there's anything you would want to add, please feel free at any time to speak up about that.
Sarah, could you clarify? You were talking about change in AR 16-20 to remove the sentence about required to report.
Right.
But then you said any member of the
Chain of command.
become aware of it, they are required.
Yeah. So anyone in the chain of command are, we'll say, mandatory reporters. So if you, as someone in the chain of command, all the way down from team leader up, become aware of a sexual assault, you are required to report it. Now keep in mind, we still want to keep that information to a small group and a need to know. So it doesn't mean we blast it all the way up. You definitely would want to reach out to your unit victim advocate or to myself, and then we want to get the command involved as well. But you could take it directly to the command. We're not reporting up through every level of the chain of command like we might other information. And it's saying that if someone comes to you as a battle buddy, right, or a friend, and you're not in the chain of command for that individual, you can still speak to them as a friend, right? One thing I've talked to a lot of you about is we all have different levels of comfort when it comes to difficult topics, right? So even though you might be like a stellar leader and all of these things, you may be uncomfortable when it comes to certain topics. That's very normal. One thing I just would advise you on is two things. Number one, if someone who's in your chain of command is talking to you and you believe that the conversation is leading to them disclosing a sexual assault to you, don't say, oh my gosh, you're not supposed to tell me that. Be cool about it. But very appropriate to stop that and to say, I want to remind you that if you do tell me that you've experienced sexual assault, I will have to report that. So if you are able to protect the victim's rights that way, please do that. But I also want to tell you that if someone comes to you and you're in their chain of command, they come to you because they trust you. So it's not a bad thing, right? The reason why we tell you not to disclose to the chain of command if they don't know is because a lot of times the victims don't know what they want to do, and we want to protect those rights. But if someone comes to you and you're in their chain of command, they trust you. So that is not the time to focus on shoulda, woulda, coulda. It doesn't matter because they've already came to you. So it makes no difference for you to say to them, if you wouldn't have came to me, you could have done restricted. It doesn't matter. Understand they're coming to you because they trust you. You don't have to explain that whole process to them. It would be good for your reaction to be calm, but to let them know that because they have told you and you are in the chain of command, you will link them up with me, but it also means that an investigation will be happening. And that's the difference. We've spent a lot of time teaching all of you about the reporting options, and a lot of you can answer those correctly on the Command Climate Survey, but it only matters if you know who to take them to. It doesn't matter that you remember that there's two types and they're restricted and unrestricted if you don't know who to take them to.
Hey, Sarah, I think it's important to point out too, just because in an event where something that was intended to be restricted becomes unrestricted for whatever reason,
yeah,
that doesn't mean that the victim has to, the survivor has to participate or communicate.
For sure.
Or answer questions.
Yeah.
So the investigation might be very, very short.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they can't come back later and state an investigation.
So Major Smith is just asking me to remind you and make sure you're aware that just because we become aware of it and it's reported, the victim does not have to, and we say victim, it's a technical term that we use. Survivor, everyone is survivor that has experienced it, but when we fill the form out, victim is the technical term that we use also. That's what I mean when I say that. They do not have to participate in any portion of the investigation. Services are offered to them. They do not have to take any of the services. They do not have to take the Special Victims Counsel. They can change their mind at any point in the process. I think that's a big thing to remember. The victim always has rights. Even if there is a CID investigation, they always have rights, I think is the big thing. So the question, one question I ask is if a victim or you as a battle buddy come and talk to myself or a VA, does that automatically result in a complaint or report? So complaint would be sexual harassment and report would be sexual assault. So sometimes when people talk to you, we take some of that trauma on ourselves, and if someone comes to you as a battle buddy and tells you something happened and gives you all the details and they don't want to talk to anyone, that can be really tough for you as a friend to want to take action on that and to want to help them, right? So come to us and use us as a resource, even just to talk to. We're here for that. Myself and the victim advocates are here for that. If you come and talk to us, or if a victim comes and talks to us, We listen to their story and then we describe the reporting options to them and ask them what they want to do. They can decide not to do anything, which is also the reason why you, as the battle buddy, could come to us, bounce things off of us, talk to us about it, and nothing will happen. We're not required to do a report, right? All right, we asked, have you or someone that you know personally ever been sexually assaulted? And 76% of you said yes. Have you ever experienced sexual harassment any time in your life? 36% of you said yes. I think too there are multiple ways we could ask that question. You may not perceive it as sexual harassment. We might all perceive things differently, which might change the response a little bit. Is there anything that any of you want to add that you haven't already said while I pull up these questions? They're like, no, we've talked. All right. Can you hold this for just a second? So I'm going to go through these questions. We won't have time to go through them all. We do have one more short video we want to show, but I do want to cover some of these questions. So I think all of us might have something to add to these. Now, if you ask a question and we don't get it answered, please come to me afterwards, okay? And we can find a way to, so sorry. Hold it. I said to talk in the microphone and then I didn't do it. So I'll work with Colonel Stoltz to find a way to address these questions. We could do an email that addresses the questions that we don't get to. Thank you very much for participating. Lots of good questions here. If you could make any change to how the Army handles sexual harassment or assault, what would it be? And anyone is free to answer that as well. Sorry, you don't have to answer just because you're holding the microphone.
Sorry, Colonel Adams, but I would remove sexual assault from, so right now it's commanders that ultimately make decisions on whether to go forward on a prosecution. I would remove that from commanders and either give it to people who are specialized within the Department of Defense for it or the U.S. Attorney's Office for a variety of reasons that are complicated. But.
And I have, this one is specifically for you, so this works out good. What is the estimated timeline that a sexual assault investigation takes from report to final results and adjudication?
So I can't fully answer that in terms of when it happens to soldiers on active duty, when it's investigated by CID. In my experience though, mostly with civilian law enforcement agencies, somewhere between 6 months and a year is pretty typical. In Iowa, most cases that I've been involved with take about 6 months for the forensics to come back, so like the DNA tests, which you can't do much oftentimes in cases without that coming, because as a prosecutor, you don't want to proceed until your case is as strong as it can get, and oftentimes those forensics can be helpful in the prosecution. So in my experience, it's somewhere between 6 months and a year, and anecdotally, what I've heard is, active duty is pretty similar.
So I actually asked that question, but thank you. The question that I had then was, if it takes 6 months to a year, how do we continue to support the survivor during that period? Who's been involved with the case, and they kind of ostracize people that are dealing with this investigation and stuff? Is that supporting the survivor? But it's hard, right? Because we don't know the results. So
I think, sir, Captain Brooks touched on it too. This has come up numerous times, especially with COVID, with all our cases being pushed back on the civilian side, is the expectation management, but also the communication. And, I think the state of Iowa, at least the state of Iowa, has not victim advocates, they have the victim coordinators that will explain the status of the case and where it's at. So I've gotten my butt chewed a number of different times, probably deservedly so, because I didn't update a family on statuses of cases. So them just coming in and talking to you and telling you where the case is at, was at least, don't be afraid to ask questions from the legal community for those. They just never asked. And I never thought to tell them. And they were embarrassed to ask the questions, and I guess I had other things going on. It's not an excuse, I'm just saying.
Right.
Advocate for yourselves, and always, always don't feel like you're putting law enforcement out by asking a question.
So I expect us to have a lot of questions, which we did. I really appreciate that. So we are going to answer all the questions. The panel and I will get together. We'll email those answers because I want to provide, there's some really good questions we didn't get to. So just an intro to our very last video. Some of you may know who Brene Brown is. So Brene Brown, by education, is a social worker. By education, she's a social worker, and she taught social work at the University of Texas. She also has been a researcher for approximately 15 years, researching shame and vulnerability. She has a lot of great TED Talks, so we're going to show just like a 3-minute video, but if you've never heard of her, she has books on Audible, lots of good stuff that would benefit everyone.
I'm actually listening to her Audible right now. Good stuff.
I can shut this off.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different from sympathy? Empathy fuels connection, sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space where someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, huh? No. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I have a, yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining to that. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I literally say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So, okay. So that, sir, you want to hit the lights, please? Oh, there. Okay. All right. So that pretty much concludes the session tonight. I hope you got something out of it. Like Brene Brown's got some really good stuff out there too. If you're not a empathetic, empathy is not your thing. It's good because she kind of coaches you through some of that stuff. So, all right. Yeah,
Yeah. Sorry about if you don't mind, I just want a couple minutes.
Okay.
So, this is something that occurred last week, so I didn't really have a whole lot of time.
Vicky?
Can you use the microphone, please? So this is something that occurred last week, so I didn't really have a whole lot of time to ask permission to speak with you for a few minutes. But I had a provider who reached out to me in regard to inquiring some drug information on a 3 suspected date rape drug. So as I trying to get information back to this provider, it's not here, so it's in the States. But as I tried to get information back to this provider, SEPM, is it really work? If any one of you, work in the hospital, you will see cases come up every now and then, very violent abuse and rape. So like yesterday when we went through the run, it came to me that if you answer yes to this question, can you stop a thief from stealing or opportunity to do so? If you answer yes to that, then program as this works. It will take awareness. It will take some action from all of us. One of the program under the Department of Justice, the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, they have DEA Victim Witness Assistant Program. And if you go to that website, you will see a lot of information, like pamphlets such as drug facilitated sexual assault. There's good information here. The European also have research that published in 2019 about drug facilitate sexual assault. And from these information, you will find out that these medications are pretty accessible. A lot of times we have extra stuff that's laying around and it could be taken you don't know about, things like prescription drugs like muscle relaxants, even over-the-counter cough, cold, allergy medication, sleep aids. And the common substance that used for date rape drugs are not even drugs. They are, or not even drug in US. They're not available in US. It's international trafficking of either drug or substance from other countries that got into the hand of the people in US. So US statistics, 90,000 to 100,000 rape annually. And that's a study over a span of 12 years. So I don't think that's changed very much, recently. That's an old statistics that I pull. So we all know that rape is underreported. We know that a lot of them, like 40%, involve, alcohol, in addition to other substances, a lot of recreational drugs. So people fear of reporting because they probably participate in these recreational drugs, right? So they don't report it. So even the statistics, it's underreported, probably like a third of what really happened out there. And a lot of time, by the time they report it, by the time forensic exam happen, these chemicals are already out of the person's system and no longer detectable. So what happened out there, we don't really know, but we know that alcohol is number one. We know that a lot of medication who make them drowsy, either physically or mentally incapacitated, will help the rapist go on with their act. But the most important key I want you to take away is that the rapists, they are not predators. For the most part, they are opportunists, just like the thief. So by having awareness, program like this, it need to spread. It need to make us really take battle buddy system seriously. Because if you do so, and we have a good battle buddy, or even just, bystanders, you will be able to stop that opportunity for people to get hurt and not be whole the next day. So as you in the situation where you can intervene, do so. Remember again, these rapists, they typically not predator, they opportunist. That's an important difference that we need to understand.
All right, that concludes. Hopefully you got something out of this. And once again, to reiterate, we're talking about survivors and how do we take care of people. There are people, you know, whether you want to call them victims or whatnot, there's a lot of resources available. If you, like I said, the disclaimer, if something's traumatically happened to you and you want to talk about it, we got resources here. You can do that unrestricted, or you know, if you want to bring it up as a restricted report or unrestricted, either way, there's options. So.